they ebb and flow in their effectiveness. So there you go.
Yeah.
And we're live streaming. So drive some traffic.
Have a conversation really about trees and the value of trees and activism in the arts. My name is Jack DeLapp. I'm a science professor here at Cornish College of the Arts, and grew up around the arts and had a strong affinity to trying to blend these two. So this is really a great place for me, and a neat place, I think, to be able to host an event like this. So I have here at the panel Josh Morris, who is the Urban Conservation Manager at Birds Connect Seattle, seeks to protect habitat, reduce urban habitat, or hazards to birds, engage people in conservation right where they live, and he's the nonprofit representative of the chair of Seattle's Urban Forestry Commission. Thanks so much, Josh, for being here. Full disclosure, I get to work with Josh on the science committee as part of Birds Connect Seattle, so I can definitely vouch he's a fantastic advocate for birds and all things wildlife. In addition, Taha Ebrahimi, thank you so much, is the author and is illustrator of the regional bestseller Street Trees of Seattle, an illustrated walking guide. She serves as a member of the Council for Historic Seattle, as well as the board for the Cal Anderson Park Alliance. She's been named by the Stranger as Seattle's coolest street expert. Fantastic. And Kersti Muul is an urban biologist, conservation specialist, first responder, science educator, and frequent contributor to local and national media, involved in all kinds of things from birds to orca whales and beyond. So fantastic to have you here. So I wanted to start really kind of by talking about value. When I was in graduate school, one of my science mentors who had been heavily involved in the spotted owl debate in Northern California and the effort to try and conserve old-growth forest there, he said two things to a number of us in our time, and really stuck with me. One was, it's not enough just to create good science, but that we have to advocate for the findings that we have and the things we care about, and that we really only conserve the things we value. And so, as a wildlife ecologist, there's so many ways to value trees, but for me, I see them often as really essential habitat, as essential for lots of different kinds of animals, from birds to bats. So I wanted to start with you, Josh, if I could, of how you connect and value and sort of frame trees.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about how my identity is sort of wrapped around and rooted with trees. I'm, like Kaylee, a descendant of colonial settlers here in Seattle. The original wealth was built by land theft and extraction of the ancient forests that were here. And my family certainly participated in that. And so thinking about how, like Kaylee said, her involvement and participation in that destruction, and it's hard not to sit here in downtown Seattle and look up at all these skyscrapers and imagine them as the trees they once were. And so that's for me how I start to think about my identity in trees and just my history as a colonial settler.
Fantastic, yeah. Taha?
This is such a good question. I was born and raised in Seattle, and I went away for about 15 years. I lived in New York City, and I came back, and I could not recognize my city. It looked completely different. A lot of what helped me connect to what I remembered were the old trees that were around here. And as I started learning more about trees, I felt more grounded and connected with the land. And I think that trees are all about sense of place. They allow you to feel like you belong to a place. And I always want to remind people about all the mental well-being benefits that come with trees. So people don't know often that those who live within just a single tree, within a 328 radius, they have a lower probability of being prescribed antidepressants. Things like that. And, if we want to have dense cities, we absolutely have to have mentally healthy cities as well. So they must go together. And the trees, you know, we're not saving them. They're saving us. They've been here for 150 million years before dinosaurs. They've lived through numerous ice ages, through numerous extinction level events. And they're resilient. They keep on going. Actually, Sandy was pointing out, there's a tree growing on this building right now. That is a vine maple up there. And these are resilient beings. This area we're standing on right now, the very last original tree was logged in 1874 in this downtown area. So over 150 years ago. But trees are resilient. It's us who needs them. And that's their value.
I completely agree. Can everyone hear me? No. No? Can you hear me now? Okay. So, to piggyback on what everyone else has said, I was born in Seattle, born in West Seattle, born and raised. My dad planted a tree when I was born, so a Douglas fir in the side yard. So, and he taught me everything I knew about wildlife and the connection to the land, and he taught me that we were a part of it and not separate from it, and taught me how trees were connected to wildlife. And so I became a systems person, you know, from a baby till today. So I see in systems and how things work together, and professionally I've been informed, my values are informed by what I see, you know, boots on the ground every day working with the urban wildlife and what they need. And so I see trees not only for the value that they have for themselves and what they do for me and my well-being, but also they're a bridge to diversity and abundance and for wildlife. And we can't survive without them, period. Nothing can, so, yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Again, there's so many dimensions of the ways in which we can value and find shared values among trees in terms of their own ways that they contribute to the ecology, to the temperature, to so many different things. So those are all great. As a graduate research person studying birds in this area, a lot of my work for many, many years was trying to assess what happens to forests when we cut them down and we put in new residential development, particularly in the greater Seattle area. And it's a mixed bag from bird perspectives in terms of diversity, in terms of how those things change the local landscape and the species that live there. But at that core, there's that competition between human needs and between needs of nature. So I'm wondering for each of you, what do you see as some challenges to urban tree conservation in Seattle proper? Kersti, can I start with you?
Okay, I actually made a list for this one because there's so many, and I don't want to double dip here because I know Josh will probably talk about policy. So policy is a huge problem. But for me personally, the type of activism I do, so I am subject to retaliation, and activism can be scary, and it's not for everybody. And you have to kind of know yourself and know what kind of person you are and what you're prepared for. So that's just one thing. There's a lot of different silos. All the groups are in their silos, and there's so oftentimes not great communication, and everybody has their own objective. I also think activism is a luxury. So to me, it's a luxury. It's something for people who have extra time and that can put themselves out there and have the resources and are in the know about what we need to be activating about. It's a choice. I feel it's a lifestyle. It doesn't stop when you go on vacation. So it's very exhausting, and the more you do and the more you know, it just kind of encompasses your life, and you need to make healthy choices around that and get away from it sometimes, but it's hard to do. It's hard to step away because there's so much that needs to be done. I also don't live in the camp of individual actions or just a drop in the bucket, because I feel that we, as individuals, we comprise that bucket, and everything that we do, every choice that we make goes in that bucket, and collectively, and I think that passing the buck to the bucket, you know, the big brother, whoever, you know, it's just finger pointing, and it doesn't solve anything, because individually there's so much you can do, and I think people become paralytic and don't know what to do. So those are some of the challenges that I see.
I'd love to pop in there. I think that we think of, a lot of people think of trees as these beautification objects. And they are so much more than that. Not only do they lower the temperature by up to 20 degrees, they help with storm water runoff, all the mental well-being benefits that I just mentioned. And then to boil that down into something as arbitrary as trunk diameter, which is how our policies get written, you know? So trunk diameter is totally arbitrary, as I'm sure Josh and Kersti both know. Some trees get really big, really fast. Some trees remain small, like a crepe myrtle. Does that mean that no crepe myrtle in Seattle is worth protecting? I don't know. But when it comes down to it, we have to think about this as infrastructure. And if we value trees for the infrastructure that they provided, we would have a lot more respect. So you think about an affordable housing development, you would never build that without running water or electricity. I wish that we would think about trees in the same way as the infrastructure that they provide.
I think too, a taken for grantedness that exists around trees is that we can just replant them. We can cut them down and we can replant them. And that may not be the case. It's extremely difficult in urban conditions for many trees to thrive. And when you take down trees, it becomes even more difficult to establish new young trees if you don't have other trees around them. That makes it more difficult to ensure that we're able to grow up an urban forest if we continue cutting down big mature trees. Another big problem is, like Kersti and Taha are saying, the policy. We have a policy that allows a lot of leeway and convenience to developers. There is no expectation that development respect the natural features that exist on a site, and that typically is to expedite the building process. There are definitely ways to build and retain trees. It typically does take a little bit more extra planning up front, and that isn't always appealing to people. And that's definitely a big problem in retaining big mature trees. Another is funding. We have a 30% canopy goal in Seattle, and we're currently at 20.1%. It sounds like we're close, right? But that's still hundreds of acres of canopy that we'd have to regain. And replanting to meet that, if we were to not lose any trees any longer, would be over $200 million of planting costs to reach that 30% goal. And that's assuming that we didn't lose a single tree moving forward for the next 13 years. I can tell you that we are not funding urban forestry at that level. I don't even think that the city understands that that's the cost that would be required to reach that goal. And so massive new funding, aggressive new funding is something that we need to seek in order to meet our canopy goals.
I just want to explain really quickly our policy in the most simplest terms. It's kind of like there's two sets of rules. There's one set of rules for private homeowners, and it's based on the diameter of a tree. And then there's another set of rules for developers only. And those rules are that the developer, correct me if I'm wrong, can develop up to 80% of that plot of land, regardless of how old or how big the trees are on there. The only thing that's protected is something called a heritage tree, and I believe there's only like 200 or so of those trees in the city, the entire city of Seattle.
Yeah, it's actually up to 85 to 100%.
It's even worse.
Yeah, depending on what zone the tree is in. So.
Another challenge that I see is a shifting baseline, like Kaylee was talking about too. A lot of folks who are coming to Seattle are coming from places in the Midwest or Southwest where trees aren't as abundant or as big as they are in Seattle. And so it does not seem to be cause for concern that Seattle is losing a few trees just because the other cities aren't as green as Seattle. That's something that we have to contend with too.
All such good points. I'm often thinking too about this exchangeability or belief in the equal value of things at different ages. And we, of course, in the bird world think a lot about species that are heavily specialized. Some of our area that are really endemic, globally rare, that depend entirely on very old trees. And then there's some that make use of things that are much younger, much smaller, and then the complexity too. We can value these trees and be concerned about the conservation as individuals, but as a collective, and the emergent phenomena that comes out of an ecology of a place where all these different trees and shrubs are interacting together is really powerful, and something that is often lost with these kind of very limited kind of prescriptions for what kind of flora we have. So as a scientist myself, and as an educator here at the college, as an illustrator of science and trying to communicate those concerns, I really see the arts, advocacy, and science as all really highly interdependent, that really benefit from one another and can help one another. And so I wanted to ask, how do each of you see activism, the arts, science, or evidence based information, how do those work to help you engage and inspire others to do this work, to care, to value, to try and save trees? Josh?
Great question. I'm always wondering, what is it going to take to make you act? I send a lot of emails in my work, and I'm often trying to get some action out of that. Email your council member, come to a meeting. So what story, what piece of information do I need to share with you to persuade you? And so I do a lot of my own original analyses with the city's data to try to visualize and understand where tree canopy is threatened, or how much it's going to cost to fund our canopy goals. And then there's a whole science of communication, and how short your email subject line has to be, and where you put the photo, and what contrast level you set the call to action button. And so there's a lot of that goes into sending out the communications that to try to inspire conservation action. But ultimately, what it really does boil down to is your own personal relationship and connection with the thing that I'm asking you to protect. And so what I really want you to do is go on a walk with Taha. What I really want you to do is to see Kersti's photographs, because when you do that, it just makes my job so much easier.
Yeah.
Okay, just a follow-up on that real quickly. I did bring a metal print. It was a birthday gift for my partner Jeff. These are merlins, black merlins, the species that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. And they absolutely have to have tall conifers to nest in, particularly Douglas fir. And so without Douglas fir, we don't have these. This is a series of copulation. This is a pair that I have been researching since I discovered them in 2019. So my style, I'm definitely a shock and awe type of activist. I am a direct action activist. I use my body. I will stop you physically from doing something that I think is wrong. And I'm a solutions activist. So I use my photography, art, illustration, photographs. I use them often to show the threats that urban wildlife face. Particularly, so I do wildlife rescue, and I will often show very sad pictures, but those sad pictures drive people to action, and it informs them of what is happening in our urban spaces and what the threats are, particularly to birds. For example, I recently had an electrocuted eagle, and I don't shy away from posting those things on social media because I get the community riled up because A, they're learning about what that threat is, B, they're learning that they have this amazing animal in their neighborhood, C, then they know what they can do to act on that. So these people got upset, they emailed the utility, got the media on it. I love to use the media. Media comes out, I make a big stink about it, and the next thing you know, the utility's out there changing the line configuration to make it safer for our bigger raptors. I definitely do that. Because I also feel like Josh said, inspiration lights the fire of activism. If you're not inspired by something and you don't know it exists, you're not going to go try to save it. So I have an app. It's got about 6,000 people on it, and I'm trying to create or get a more diverse audience down to the beach to see wildlife, to see killer whales, to see birds. We share an acoustic commons, and I'm really a strong advocate for acoustic equity as a term I kind of just made up. I don't know if anyone's ever said it before, but it makes sense to me that what we get to hear and see is equitable, and I'm just started teaching some acoustic ecology classes for people who are vision impaired or anyone that's interested, so that, and I've designed it through bird song so that you can hear the landscape through knowing the birds, because the birds occupy different spaces in the canopy, and they rely on diverse amounts of trees, or types of trees. So if you hear the birds, get to know their songs and their calls, you know kind of what you would be seeing. So that's what I do for activism.
So cool. So when I was invited to this and the word activism was in the title, I thought about it and I was like, am I an activist? And then it was weird. But what I try to do is help people connect with the land and the trees around them, because that was the experience that I had when I recognized trees. And I want people to feel that excitement about knowing a specific tree, seeing things in a totally different way. And I felt like I had not seen this place in that way until I knew the trees. So for me, it's really about helping people have that personal relationship, like both Josh and Kersti mentioned. They're clues, they're portals into another world. And when you see that and you feel that joy of recognizing the tree and identifying it, it's just inexplicable. And I want to create that experience for people, especially in Seattle right now. It feels like it's more of a transient city. People come here for 2 or 3 years and they leave, and the only way I see people being involved in the city physically is if they know the place. And so much of our time is spent in our heads now, indoors. This is one way to get outside and know this place.
Fantastic. What would each of you want to say, do you think, as a final charge for this major concern around trees and tree conservation and how we value them and how the arts can facilitate and how well-researched information and strong advocacy and activism can support those roles? What would you want everybody here before we depart to know?
We're up against some powerful special interest groups, and even in Seattle, which has quite a green reputation, maybe even a veneer, it's hard to conserve things here. It's incredibly hard. It's a grind. I do it every day, and it's just a non-stop fight, basically, to win, to keep things the same. It's never moving. It never feels like progress. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is they've got a lot of money and a lot of expertise, but I think we have a lot of people And so if you're not already actively engaged, find a way to do so. Go on a walk with Taha. Join Kersti's WhatsApp group. Come to a bird walk with Birds Connect Seattle to find an entry point. Also get to know your local street trees. Street trees need a lot of care. And if you're the adjacent property owner, if you didn't know it now, you are responsible for taking care of that tree most likely. So take care of your local trees. If you have a native tree, a Douglas fir, a western hemlock, a western red cedar, those are treasures in Seattle now. There's only 5% of our street trees are native at this point. And so whatever you do, art, emailing council members, be annoying. It's okay. So whatever you are willing to do, please do it.
Like Josh just mentioned, when the first settlers arrived in Seattle in 1851, one of the first things they did was to clear cut the Emerald City. So all the trees that you see are planted by humans, and only 5% of our street trees are actually native to this area. The other 95% were brought here by other people. They were trees that reminded them of other places, or it was a way for them to make this place their own. And I mention this because there were people who lived here before that, actually. And what we all share with the entire history of this area in Seattle is that we've always been losing our environment, and our environment has been changing. Whether it was the straightening of the Duwamish River, or getting rid of this big Denny Hill right here, or creating the ship canal. We are all intimately connected with the past in this area, in the sense that we've been losing our environment. But we also share that we've always been resilient, and we've always persevered in that. So I remind that to us that this is not a unique situation, and there are thousands and thousands of other souls before us that share this path.
I would say be curious, go outside, listen to the birds, don't give up, don't be afraid, be nosy. So I spend my time being super nosy, and it's amazing what I see every day and the amount of things that I turn in. If you see something going on with a tree that you think isn't okay, find out. Don't just walk by it and say, well, it must be legal or it must be permitted because they're doing it. 99% of the time, it's not. So my advice is just take an interest in your neighbors, take an interest in your neighborhood, not just the humans, but all the wildlife. Just be super curious, and it will inspire you.
Follow your curiosity. I think that is such a good clue. Yeah.
I'm always shocked when I'm out with my camera and birds are screaming and people are just walking by and they have no interest in what's going on. And I'm like, you have a falcon nesting in your yard and you don't even know. And they're like, oh, I thought it was a woodpecker. It's really loud and annoying. So, and then through that, you get to teach that person that that falcon needs a specific tree, like the one that you have in your yard. Please don't cut it down. So it grows.
That's such a great example too. I was at University of Washington many years ago. There was a peregrine falcon on campus, and it was being dive bombed by a red-tailed hawk. And there were thousands of students going back and forth between all of their classes. No one stopped. Nobody looked up. And there was one person with their back to me, and I approached, and when they turned around, I realized it was another bird biologist who was in my lab. It was the only other person who was paying attention. So that's a wonderful place, I think, for us to stop to say thank you, all three of you, for sharing all the hard work you do, all the inspiration, all the ways to try and connect, and what a wonderful event. Thank you. Please follow up with all of these folks and find ways to be connected to urban conservation. Thanks so much. Thanks, James.
Everybody, thank you so much for being here. I just want to close by thanking Orange College for hosting this event. And thank you to the last 6,000 for allowing themselves to be placed at the centerpiece of this event. If it is in your means to get and watch them in a comfortable way, please be curious. Thank you, everybody.
And you just walked in on Ox's podcast.